Welcome to the Healthcare Security Cast, the podcast dedicated to healthcare security, safety, and emergency management. If you are involved with a healthcare security program or desire to be, this podcast is for you. Join the conversation as we discuss the issues that matter to healthcare security professionals while leveraging the expertise of healthcare security thought leaders and experts in personal development. And now, here's your host, Brian Hamilton.
Before we jump into today's show, I just want to thank our sponsors and collaborators, 3D Network Technology, Genetech, the Change Execution Group and 360 Life Transformations, Canadian Security Magazine, and Omnigo. Welcome to the Healthcare Security Cast for Tuesday, May the 18th. I'm joined today by Steve Kellams. Steve, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thanks. I'm glad you could have me.
Oh, absolutely. Now, I always like to start off by asking this of every guest, who is Steve Kellams?
Who is Steve Kellams? It's such a great question because it pretty much lets me do whatever I want, right? I am a retired law enforcement officer. I retired after 30 years in law enforcement, 27 and a half of those at a police department in Indiana, central Indiana. Made my way up through the ranks at the police department, spent 10 years as a patrol officer before getting promoted to sergeant, spent 11 years at sergeant at the department, and then continued up as through lieutenant and finally retired in 2019 at captain. Throughout that time, training was a huge part of what I did. Field training officer after about a year and a half on the department, they made me a field training officer. And then continued with dealing with that and working with that throughout my advancement through the department. And then upon retiring, I went into teaching full time. So now I travel around the country. I teach law enforcement agencies a wide variety of topics, mostly in the area of training, leadership, and management and supervision.
Awesome stuff. So you retired in 2019, then went right into full-time teaching. So I guess how long was your quote unquote retirement?
0. Because, when you retire in public safety, right, you've got all these days added up, this vacation times and benefit leave times and sick times and whatever. And so I had a lot of that time built up. So when I retired, you got to work your last day at the police department. But I had about 3 or 4 months worth of time built up. So my last day of work was actually in 2018. And then I started teaching full time while I was still employed at the police department. So then on one of those breaks when I was home for a week was my last day at the police department. So I walked in, dropped all my stuff off, waved everybody as I did a victory lap, and then headed on out the door to another training event the week later. So I really didn't have any time off.
That's awesome. Okay, that makes a little more sense to me. I interviewed Mike D'Angelo a while back. He went from policing to a healthcare security program, and now he's a consultant. But yeah, he retired. He worked his last day on a Friday, and then started at the hospital on a Monday.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's when we get into this, right? We love to work. I love to teach, and I was always training for years at the police department and all my time off. So it was something that I loved doing. And I don't sit still well. So sitting at home, I've got all these little projects that nothing ever gets accomplished, of course. That's my wife keeps telling me. I try to get these things done. And then, sitting at home for too long, like last year during the COVID-19 shutdown, well, that was rough because I'm not used to not being able to do anything for several months. So, teaching and training is something I love to do. And they keep me very, very busy.
Can you look back and kind of figure out, like, was there something that really highlighted that part of your career? Like, what was it that really drew you to the whole training piece and really focusing on that area?
I think that it was really one of the first times that I got to sit in the car and start teaching the new recruit. And I hadn't been on for very long at all. I went to Indiana University. I went through the Indiana University police program, which put me through the law enforcement academy while I was at school. And then I started at the police department, and I'd only been there for just a couple of years before they were like, "Hey, Steve, you know that FTO program we've got?" I said, "Yeah." They said, "Well, you're going to be an FTO." I said, "Well, what am I supposed to do?" I said, "Well, just go teach them to be a cop." And so I really went into it completely blank on what I was supposed to do. No idea as what those steps were, what I should be doing. And there was kind of this light bulb moment after, 6 months or a year of doing that, where I'm explaining something to a new recruit. And I went, how did I know that? where did that come from? And you just tend to get, I mean, Bloom's taxonomy talks about how you have to be at a higher level to teach another level. So after being a cop for about a year, I really became better at my job. And that was a huge eye-opening moment for me, which really made me love teaching, because I learn as much from the classes that I teach as hopefully they learn from me.
Did you feel like being fairly new to policing, that helped you be a more effective FTO? And I think the way I want to frame that is, I know when I've set up training programs before, some of the senior officers had a harder time training people because they'd been doing the job so long, they took so many things for granted and just assumed that certain things. So, I remember getting trained by myself as a security officer, and one of the longer standing officers, he left out a whole bunch of steps when he was showing me something. So I had to kind of, figure it out for myself, even though I was shown. Did you find that it helped you just being someone new to the role?
I don't know. I think that's a great question. I mean, it's called unconscious competence, right? Whenever
Right.
we do something and we know it so well that we don't even realize other people don't know that. And so it probably did help at a certain level, knowing that I was still working so hard to figure things out, that, I didn't necessarily leave those steps out. But I also think that, older officers have tremendous amount of experience. And if they can kind of step back a little bit and recognize that they do have to start at a base level, they can have so much information to provide to a new officer. So I think it was a double-edged sword, right? I could communicate better with the younger officers because I was younger too. I understood where they were coming from and some of their thought processes that maybe an older officer at the time wouldn't. But much later, when I started realizing how all this stuff fit together, when I started getting my own education in training and recognized all the little pieces and saw what I was doing wrong, I think that's really where I turned the corner in my training. And now I was able to take my communication skills, my youth, and what little experience I had, add it with all of the actual learning and teaching theories, and was able to put out what I think was a great product in those new officers. And I think that's exactly what departments and agencies and organizations need to be doing today.
Awesome. Now, looking back at your role as an FTO, how did it really grow to what you're doing today? Like, how did your name get out there, and how did you end up doing this full time?
It's little stuff. I started, so for several years, I had no idea what I was doing. We had a very lackluster field training program. Officers they were coming out. I call it a blink and breathe program, which is what most agencies have, right? You've got it in paper. If somebody can walk in and their eyes can open and close, when air can go into their lungs and be expelled from it, they've got themselves a job. And that's all it takes. And that's what our program was. But we had, we were getting some poor officers coming out. We were seeing tenured officers that couldn't do basic jobs. We got a new administration, and training became important to them. And so they looked at me, who was kind of the oldest serving FTO or longest serving FTO at the time. And they said, Steve, go find us a new FTO program because ours sucks. Well, I went out and started taking all these classes that I'd never taken before. And that's when I realized our program didn't suck. We just didn't know what we were doing or how to make it work. And so going and talking to guys like Glenn Kaminsky and learning from people who wrote the San Jose model, and also taking all the other various model programs out there and seeing how they work, I sat down and kind of created our own program, but it's not. It's simply a hybrid San Jose model. I put this thing together and started working with the other FTOs in our department and pushing it out. And the first thing I knew I had to do was get everybody on the same page. So I kind of created a class to teach our own officers. So I do that for, a year or so. And then I started getting phone calls from all the agencies around me. Hey, we hear you got an FTO program. Can we send somebody? Sure, send them on. That goes on for a couple of years. And then I start getting phone calls from around Indiana. Steve, we hear you've got an FTO program. Will you come up here? And that's when I started my own LLC, started going around and traveling the country and teaching it just on time off, vacation time, break times. Hooked up with some training companies across the United States, some out in Massachusetts and some down in the South, where they were having me come into other states and teach this. And then I guess my name just grew from word of mouth, people going to classes and enjoying it and liking it. And one of the largest public safety training companies in the United States gave me a call and asked me to work for them as a general contractor. So I do a lot of work for them now. I know that this year I've got 38 classes scheduled throughout the year. That's pretty much one a week. Doesn't give me a whole lot of spare time for other stuff. But again, as I said, I love doing it. So it's really been a blast. And that's kind of how I got out there doing this. So for over 20 years, I've been teaching FTO topics as well as management and supervision topics lately, and adding that to my repertoire. So a lot of travel, a lot of instruction, and a lot of word of mouth.
Wow, that's tremendous. And it's really grown beyond law enforcement as well, like you mentioned there.
Absolutely. I mean, when I talk about my classes that I teach, especially through some of the public safety angles, I teach a lot of corrections officers, dispatchers, private security, firefighters. In the world of public safety, that training model, the on-the-job training model, is so common. And it's not any different than the world of the pipe fitter or the iron worker, right? They all have on-the-job training. But at law enforcement, we've actually kind of formalized it a little bit and really helped those new recruits turn that corner. And all of those people come to the classes that I teach.
Awesome. Now, let's talk about that a little bit. So when building a program, now, maybe I'm just thinking in terms of someone who may not have access to yourself. I know you're a busy guy. What is a good kind of starting ground? What are the important pieces of a good FTO program?
How much time do we have?
As much as you need.
When you talk about critical elements, because there really are quite a few.
Yeah.
The most important one is you have to have the backing of your chief executive officer, right? Your CEO has to recognize the importance of training, because the struggle that we see across the United States is that we want those bodies now, right? We want those bodies working for us right now. And whether it being in private security or public safety, everybody's short. And so when the new person comes in, I can't spend 3 or 4 months training them. I have to put them out here right now. But what we don't recognize is that's not a +1, right? When you're looking at adding that to a schedule, adding a body that doesn't know what they're doing, that's not even a 0. That's a negative. That pulls away from everything else. So your CEO has to recognize the importance of training. They have to spend some time and some money to bring people in and get them properly trained. Once that happens, then you get all the benefits of having that employee out there that knows what they're doing. And so having the commitment from the CEO is huge. The next step after that is simply looking and getting some organization to your program. And, there are a lot of little elements, things like a daily evaluation report that's really important to make sure they get feedback in your training, making sure that your trainers are trained. The type of model or program you use, though, that's really pretty open. When it comes to courts, they don't care that much about what type of model you use. They just want to see that whatever you have is written down and that you follow it. So you can find a lot of information online. I'm a big fan of the San Jose model, but there are a lot of other training models out there. Some are, some have strengths in some areas and weaknesses in others. So looking for a program that matches your needs and putting it into place and then following it's huge.
Awesome. Now, in terms of finding those right individuals to be your FTOs, what are some of the things that we want to look for?
We have to weed out bias. That is the number one thing. There's no place for bias in field training. As a matter of fact, you talked about younger officers or older officers. They all have benefits. And I think a younger officer can be a phenomenal trainer. You just got to keep a little eye on them. They don't know everything yet. They have to know who to ask when they don't know. The older officers have a tremendous amount of experience that can be really useful. But at the end of the day, you have to weed bias out of it. It can't be about whether I like the person or don't like the person. It can't be about any sex, race, creed, religion. It can't be about any of those things. It has to be about their performance on the job. So I'm looking for officers that recognize that, can set aside any biases they might have, focus solely on performance, and get the new officers trained.
Awesome. Now, when you're starting out with with the different groups that you work with, do you find that do you find more that you're having to just tweak a few things that they're already doing, or in most cases, are you just kind of having to build the program from scratch?
It's about 50-50. There's a lot of organizations out there that are doing things right. There really are. And, but there are also a lot of organizations out there that either had no training whatsoever. Only about 63% of law enforcement agencies in the United States utilize field training. And that hasn't changed over a number of years. Again, there's reasons why. It's about time and money that people don't want to put into it. So a lot of those agencies are coming to me for the first time saying, we've never had anything. We don't know what to do. And so I help build them one from scratch. But I also get a lot of agencies that come in and they've got a great program in place. We're just tweaking little things. When we talk about things like hospital security, which is a big push in Indiana right now because they've just allowed those to become full police departments. I'm seeing a lot of people coming into my classes through the hospital security side. And what's always struck me about those is that they bring all these variety, typically officers that are part-time from other agencies, right? So you have 5 or 6 different police agencies. Every one of them do things differently. You bring the officers in, you're like, great, you're now hospital security, go. And these guys are all doing their own things from their own departments. That's not what the hospital wants. It's not what the administration wants. It's not what the head of security wants, but they didn't provide them with any training. So what are they supposed to do? And so looking at agencies like that, they can literally take any of these models from public safety, tweak it slightly to fit their, the private security side and some of those specific problems that you have, like in the medical field, obviously with HIPAA and some of these other types of issues you have to be really aware of, add that information to it. You got yourself a solid program.
Awesome. Now, just looking at dispatchers, do you take it a different approach for building an FTO program for a dispatcher?
Only from the side of the performance categories. As far as how you train and how you put a program together, no. They can use a San Jose model program. It's just their daily evaluation reports are going to be based on different performance categories or the different actual things they're doing in their job. Being able to answer the phone calls, being able to work the computer systems, being able to dispatch the information out. So you want to get into those categories, those performance categories, and make sure those are correct. They don't need to worry about, contact and cover from an officer safety standpoint because they're sitting in the room, but they do need to understand things like how to provide CPR over 911 or how to do some of those types of things, which are totally different than what officers have to deal with. So, but as far as the program goes, how often you're evaluating, how you're training, because all people learn the same. All adults learn the same way. And so making sure we're doing the proper steps of prepared to teach our lesson, explaining our lesson, demonstrating our lesson, letting them perform the lesson, evaluating that. These are all really common, simple steps to do that shouldn't be skipped no matter where you're working. So dispatchers, corrections officers, fire, even though their jobs are different, the only things that change are those specific performances for that job. The process is always the same.
Yeah, and you bring up something interesting there that all adults learn the same way. And when you think about adult learning principles, what are some of the key things that stick out for you for, I guess, specifically teaching these new skills to, so I guess in a lot of cases, new skills to adults?
So the way adults take information and organize it to help them, that's, I think, one of the biggest things is that as an instructor, we tend to teach things the way we learned. I mean, I'm a very organized kind of guy. I'm CDO, right? I'm OCD with the letters of the proper order. That's the way my head works. If I don't have things lined up perfectly, step 1, step 2, step 3, then I really struggle. But a lot of people don't learn that way. A lot of people, what I think step 3, step 1 for somebody else, by the time I get there, they're like, oh, now I got it. And so that's one of the biggest things is being flexible as an instructor and recognizing that everybody learns differently. And so providing them the information to figure out the problem. And the big solution to that is just let them go figure out the problem. There are a lot of right ways to do this job. As a trainer, we step in and fix it when it's wrong, not when it's different. And that's where we learn. That's where we see guys do things that we didn't do. I mean, I grew up as a cop in the 90s, right? So, that's now that's old school policing. And I remember my very last days as a captain, I wasn't out working the streets very often. I wasn't like I was out there doing things, but every now and then I would put on a uniform and get in the squad car and ride around with a younger officer. And I would watch the way they would handle things in the public. And as I was seeing them do things, I remember getting on calls and getting really frustrated because they weren't doing it the way I wanted it done. But as I sat back and watched, I realized the way they were doing it was better. They were more professional than we were. They were responding to people appropriately and they were handling the problems the way they should. And it was different, but better. And that's a huge thing that we all have to learn.
No, that's it. That's a huge thing. Being able to be flexible like that and understanding that even though, you're the expert, somebody may have a better way of doing things.
Absolutely. That's why I said I learn a lot from every class I teach. Somebody says something and I go, wow, that's a great idea, or that's really good. And so I always pick something up. As an adult, you never stop learning, right? It's a continuing process throughout your life, recognizing that there are certain times in your life when you're prepared to learn new information. I learn things now that I could have never learned at 25 because I wasn't ready for it. I wasn't prepared for it. And now with the experiences, things click more. And that's the thing with all adults. So you have to recognize as you're bringing new people in, which in each department's different. Some agencies hire a lot of young 21-year-old kids. And so you're teaching these very young generations. Others hire what they call lateral officers coming with prior law enforcement experience. They've got a lot more experience. And so they learn differently. And looking in the private security, they're hiring a lot of a wide variety of ranges of people. And so they have to be incredibly flexible. They could have two brand new rookies with a 30-year difference in age between them. And so recognizing that huge difference in background and experiences is important.
Now, what I'm curious to know is, because obviously, you've explained how you got to this point and how it's kind of happened organically. What is it that keeps you going? What is it that keeps you wanting to do this? Because you could probably, just based on the fact that you've put in your time in law enforcement, you could probably sit back and, finish all those tasks your wife's asking you to finish if you wanted to. But what is it that keeps you going with the training?
Yeah, I got to admit that getting that pension check's pretty amazing. But I think what keeps me going is I love training. I love teaching. And I had a class the other day in which one of the guys in the class came up and started talking to me during the break. And this guy was smart. I mean, this guy was deep book. I mean, he starts talking to me about classical mythology and how it applied. And I'm thinking, and forcing me and asking really good questions that forced me to actually think about what I've been teaching and to answer the questions. And it just made me smarter. And it's those little things like that. When I go to a class and I teach and nobody asks any questions and I just kind of stand up and I feel like a puppet, I'm not, but getting that feedback, getting guys that really challenge me and force me to think, and also getting those guys that respond back to me saying, thanks so much for what you gave me. I've learned so much. We're adding this, we're doing that. And so I get emails all day long, every day from people that I've trained asking me for clarification and then following up with how much they enjoyed it or appreciated it. And that's the biggest thing that keeps me going, because as I said, I love teaching, and getting the feedback from the people you teach that's worth all of it. So that's what I enjoy doing more. And that's what keeps me going.
Do you have maybe a favorite story or one story that sticks out of somebody who you were able to make an impact on through these training endeavors?
Kind of. So I do a lot of teaching in Flagstaff, Arizona, Coconino County Sheriff's Department. And these guys from there came to a class I was teaching in Vegas. They asked me a lot of questions about wanting to implement a program. They really didn't have anything. They weren't sure where they wanted to go. I communicated a lot with one of them, and then he kept sending me emails. About every month or so, I'd get another email with another clarification question, and I would answer it. And then they called me up and asked if I'd come up and teach there. And they've had me there probably about half a dozen times at least over the last couple of years, teaching their people. And they have taken something that they didn't have any program whatsoever, and they've created one of the best corrections officer training programs that I've seen. They just really taken what I spoke about. They took it to heart. They're not following me step by step, which they shouldn't, right? Because they're at a different place, but they took the ideas and they put that thing together and they created a fantastic program. And all of it because basically one guy just really took to heart what I was talking about. And watching guys like that's probably a big success story that sticks out in my head.
Yeah, it's almost, there's a bunch of mini Steves out there now who are doing the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, that's kind of what it is, right? Is that it's not so much that I want to recreate myself everywhere, but watching that spark light and really making a change. Because when I left my department, I felt really good about the training of my officers. I'd put those officers up against any officers in the United States because of the training program that we put together and the effort that the department put into making that happen. And so when I can see other agencies do the same thing, and as I tell people, it matters. When you look back at your career, what you did it matter? Did it make a difference? And I don't think anything makes a greater difference in training your organization and turning it into something professional.
No, I'd have to agree with you. It's probably the most impactful thing that you can do.
And it makes a difference for your generations and the next generations to come. You set a foundation for everything that's going to come after you're done. And, to walk in and look at a person, to have somebody that you trained that now sits at the highest levels of your organization, and recognizing that legacy of training goes all the way back to the brand new people. There are people starting in my department today. They're learning from people that I taught, the ways that I taught them. I'm not even there anymore. And to think that you can still make an impact is huge. I mean, that's worth everything. It's worth all the headaches. It's worth all the late nights. It's worth all the hair pulling that could possibly happen. It's absolutely worth it.
Awesome. Now, so you're someone who didn't really slow down going into retirement. You also started a podcast as well. Can you talk to us about your podcast?
I did. Absolutely loving Blue Canary Podcast. I'm having so much fun doing it. And, I talked about 2020. I don't sit still well, right? And so 2019, I retire. I think in 2019, I had something like 30 plus classes that year. So I was already moving a lot. 2020 was going to be a huge year. I had all this stuff scheduled, and then bam, it just stopped. And so I sat around for a month or two, watching YouTube and learning how to roast chicken and stuff like this. And, you can only mow the yard so many times, but that's when that teaching bug just didn't stop. And I was like, I've got to keep doing something. So what can I do? Podcasts were a huge thing for me. I worked night shift for 10 years at the police department. And one of the things I learned really quickly is terrestrial radio, right? It recycles every 4 hours. So you hear all the same songs in all the same order, even the same people, that even the same bumper talk is recorded someplace else. And so what I realized is after 4 hours, I'm listening to the same stuff. So I get bored. And so I started listening to talk radio. And now back in the day, talk radio, there was a guy called Art Bell. And I don't know if anybody remembers Art Bell, but Art Bell, the night talk radio was crazy stuff. This is all aliens and ghosts and crazy stuff. And I loved listening to that because, one, you could laugh at it, you could have a good time, but it kept me awake, kept me thinking. So then after that, traveling so much, I found podcasts, which is kind of like talk radio on demand, right? You get to pick your topics and you get to go listen to stuff. And so I got heavily into podcasts and I loved listening to them. And then when 2020 hit and I can't train, I thought, let's do a podcast. And so I fired up the computer and I just started rambling into it. A company, Agency 360, that they do onboarding software for field training, a phenomenal company that I'd worked with for a long time. They hit me up and they said, Steve, we heard a couple of your episodes that you dropped and we want to sponsor you. I said, great. What's that mean? They said, we have no idea. Let's figure it out. And so they ended up hiring me a producer. We pulled those rambling ones off and we really dialed into topics and put together what I feel like some really good, solid professional podcasts. We dropped first season. So there's about 12 episodes out there for first season. We're in production for second. I've got a couple of them already done. I'm waiting to roll those out. I'm looking for June, hopefully next month or July by the latest, to have this thing up and running again for second season, another 10, 12 episodes, hopefully covering a wide variety of law enforcement and public safety. I wanted cops to tell our stories. I feel like for so many years, we've let other people tell our stories and they're not telling our stories. They're telling their stories with our faces on them. And I didn't like that. And so I wanted the idea is to basically tell cop stories. And so it's a show by a cop for cops. And if you're interested in law enforcement, if you're anything ancillary to law enforcement, I think you'll find a lot of great stuff. First season, I interviewed guys like Ed Morales from the FBI Miami shootout, Dave Grossman, who's retired Lieutenant Colonel of the United States Army Ranger, psychiatrist, psychologist, responsible, New York Times bestselling On Killing, people like Stephanie Samuels, who started Cop Line. So I interviewed a lot of people involved in a wide variety of law enforcement topics. And we're even going to go deeper this time, talking to new applicants in the next season, talking to some cop comedians. Vinny Montez is going to come on. I think we're going to have a great time with that. So really looking forward to next season. So if you haven't checked it out, you can go listen to some of the old ones or even, grab some of the new ones as they come out. But I think that you'll enjoy them. I do.
Awesome. Now, I guess, we did hit on a lot of topics there just in relation to field training. Is there anything that I didn't mention that you'd like to highlight now?
Well, I think that not necessarily didn't mention, but maybe focus a little bit on is just the importance of that on-the-job training and onboarding. There's so many people that think, well, you know what, I got a new employee and I'm just going to let him walk around with another guy for a bit and he'll learn the ropes. But that kind of hodgepodge just doesn't do it. And if you want to see some really big changes in your organization, it all starts at the bottom. I mean, too many times we look at these department changes coming from top down. But one of the things in my career is I went higher and higher in my career. I realized I had less and less power. I had less and less ability to make change. Those abilities happen at that lowest level. So that trainer on the department is the one that's the most important person there. And so that person sets the tone and standard for everything that comes after that. And recognizing just the level of importance of training your people, whether it's in public safety, whether it's in private security, you have to bring your new people in, get them onboarded correctly, get them trained properly, and then watch them go make huge advancements in your organization.
Yeah. And another thing too, that I just thought of is a lot of organizations have the challenges that are budgetary.
Yes, yes, they do.
But what are some of the things that you encourage these departments to do to, to still be able to have a good, strong training program?
Well, when you talk about budgetary, I think you have to keep things in perspective. And this is where, bosses tend to lose focus, right? When you look at the cost to bring a new officer on your department, and this is going to change dramatically depending upon where you're at. Yeah, but just for public safety or law enforcement, if you're going to bring a new officer in the department, you have to you're paying the new officer's salary and benefits. You're paying the trainer's salary and benefits. You're paying, for all the equipment and everything else, and maybe the staffing levels to offset the training you're doing. It's not uncommon to be looking at a bill of about $100,000 to bring in a brand new cop and put him on the street as an effective officer. And $100,000 is a lot of money. And so when you go to a boss and you say, this kid can't do this and he can't cut it, a lot of times what they'll say is, but I've got a lot of money into him. Mm-hmm. But what I don't think those bosses tend to realize is what those lawsuits are going for, right? The Breonna Taylor lawsuit out of court settlement was $12 million. In comparison, $100,000 is nothing, right? So recognize, if I don't train this guy, if he goes out and does something that gets us sued, I'm going to pay so much more, not only in money, but in respect, in that perception of your department. All that is gone, and you have to start from scratch again. And it's not worth it. Pay the money now. You'll be thankful that you did later.
Oh, absolutely. Now, we talked about the podcast. You're kind of booked with training. You got a lot going on. What can we look forward to what else can we look forward to in the future from you?
Well, I'm traveling. My website, bluecanaryconsulting.com. I've got a list of all my schedules. I'm already booking for next year. So I'm all over the country doing a lot of training. And these courses are open. So, again, if you're the private security, you can come to these classes. I teach a lot of people from such a wide variety. I had a superintendent from a school board in my last class. So nothing to do with law enforcement whatsoever. He was a superintendent from education on how to supervise a toxic employee, and had him in my class. So if this is something you're interested in, you can go to Blue Canary Consulting and give you some links to the upcoming classes where I kind of keep track of where I'm going to be. I'd love to see people show up to those classes and be able to share information with them. And then, pay attention to Blue Canary. Like I said, hopefully we'll drop the second season here in the next month or so. And then that'll run about every 2 weeks once we get that up and rolling until that season's done. And then we'll stop, retool again, and get things scheduled and push it out. But I don't see myself slowing down anytime soon. I retired young, and that's a beauty in law enforcement. People are like, "Oh, it must be nice to retire young," and it's like, "Yeah, but you're an old soul after spending that many years in law enforcement." But it's I'm healthy, I'm young, I'm going to keep doing this for quite some time, and hopefully be able to share as much of my information as I can. So, and I tell people in my class, I said, you're in this class for 4.5 days, but you get me for the rest of your career. You ever have a problem, an issue, a question, anything at all, go to bluecanaryconsulting.com, shoot me an email, and I'll help, I'll answer. Same thing with anybody listening to this, right? Anybody watching your podcast, if they want more information about any of this stuff, they can go to bluecanaryconsulting.com, shoot me an email, and I'll help in any way I can.
Awesome. Now, again, and I appreciate that you extending that to the whole group as well. Now, do you have a special message for the Healthcare Security Cast community? And actually, I want to shout out one member of the community, Tony Pope, because Tony Pope was actually the one who made the recommendation to have you on the show.
Yeah, Tony and I go way back. We worked together at the department. We were not quite rookies together, but pretty close to rookies together. And they've got a lot of fond memories there working with Tony at the department. Final message, particularly for the healthcare security, it's too often, I think you guys looked at yourselves in the past as simply being, private security. Everybody else gets trained every place else, and we'll just hire and rotate these people in and out as needed. And you really have to change your focus there and recognize that as representatives of that hospital, as representatives of that organization, you have a duty to train your new employees. You've got to get them trained properly. And if you do that, you're going to see such better responses. You're going to see the relationships between the nurses and doctors in security get much better. You'll see the relationships between the patients as they come in, the problems that pop up in the lobbies and the emergency rooms. You'll see those get handled better, more appropriately. You'll see less problems. You'll see greater professionalism. Just because another agency hired them doesn't mean they trained them. So you've got to make sure you're training your new people. And I think that's the biggest challenge for healthcare right now. And as again, we're seeing that in Indiana, where they've turned those into actual police departments. Other states have done this already, but Indiana allowing them to turn on their own police departments is going to be a huge change in the thought process there. And those other states in which they're still considered private security, you're not private security. You're literally cops responding to problems just in one building or one group of buildings. And so you have to recognize that change. And that's the biggest thing, is once you recognize that, you start making that training change, taking the responsibility on yourselves to make sure your people are properly trained. That's where you see the huge advancements.
Yeah, it's definitely a different perspective than I think what we're used to.
It is. And it has to change because, like I said, the laws are changing, the courts are changing, the responses are changing. With the issues taking place in public safety right now, you're not going to get cops coming. They're just not going to be available. They're not going to have the staffing, and you'll be taking care of a lot bigger things. Some of these, that's why they made the move to turning them into police departments, right? So they can take their own reports, even because when they called for a report from the local police department and it took them 3 days to show up to take the report, well, that doesn't work for you and your organization. And so they had to make changes. So I think that's what we're seeing across the country. And I think those are just going to continue.
Right now, you alluded to it earlier, just, with the website, the podcast, what is your preferred method of people reaching out to you?
Oh, my email. Yeah, actually, my website, bluecanaryconsulting.com. There's a contact section there. You can get to it. You can find my phone number. You can call it. I won't answer, right? Because there's too many people trying to sell me, new car insurance or whatever it is. My student loans are due, so I won't answer. But send me an email, and that contact information as a click. You can type an email right there, and it comes right to my phone. Everywhere I travel, I'm checking the breaks in classes, and I'll respond as quickly as I can. So bluecanaryconsulting.com is the best way to get in touch with me.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time today, Steve. I appreciate this conversation. And I look forward to hearing more from you and keeping up with what you're doing.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I had a blast. And if you ever need more information or any people do, just let me know.
The Healthcare Security Cast is available on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music and Audible, and many other platforms as well. Check out our link tree on your computer or mobile device. And this can be found at linktree/Brian Hamilton. That's linktr.ee/Brian, BRINE, Hamilton. Again, that's linktr.ee/Brian Hamilton. Or if it's easier, send me a text at 647-372-2042. That's 647-372-2042. And I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have or share any links you may be looking for. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, take care and stay safe.